Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to transform our PlayStation 5 controller. Let's get this party started. Hey everyone, and welcome back. The first thing you're going to need is a nice toolkit. This is the Treco toolkit. It comes with pretty much everything you're going to need for the job. It has a magnetic screwdriver, a pair of tweezers, some prying tools, and pretty much all the bits and pieces you're going to need for this job and any other future job. So I highly recommend you guys take a look at this one. I'll leave the links in the description below. So let's jump right into the unboxing here. This is the ExtremeRate front plate. The packaging is fair, nothing fancy. Inside you're going to find some tools, a magnetic screwdriver, some extra screws, and a prying tool, which is nice that they included this. You're also going to find some rings for the joystick inserts and a 1-year warranty that you're probably not going to redeem. The front plate itself is a nice matte black design. It has a very smooth finish with no blemishes. It feels really good and really high quality in the hand. You can see the quality of the molding and the paint job that they've done on this front plate. Inside you'll also find the touchpad itself as well. Again, nice and smooth, no blemishes. This is the ExtremeRate wood grain trim. It feels high quality in the hand, very smooth design, and I think the contrast between the wood grain and the matte black design of the front plate, it's really going to shine. I've also went ahead and purchased the ExtremeRate replacement buttons. This is the metallic steel gray. It's really nice. It feels great in the hand as well. Everything is high quality, and I think the contrast between the wood grain, the matte black front plate, and the silver button, it's really going to make everything just pop. But they come in a variety of colors, so you can choose what's right for you. Alright, grab your coffee. This is going to be a long video. I'll leave a timeline in the description below, so just jump exactly where you need to go. So keep in mind that the ExtremeRate front plate is only supported on the BDM-020 controller. These are the older model controllers, and you'll be able to determine that based off of the model that's imprinted on the back of your controller. So take one of your old existing controllers and flip it over. On the back, you're going to see a model. If the model says CFI-Z CT1W without the A, then you're in good shape to continue. So let's get this party started. Use your prying tool to go ahead and move in between the controller, sliding around and popping it little by little and being patient as you move along. You're going to see there's a groove there as you continue to pry it open, and it'll stay open as you continue moving along the lines of the controller. Just take your time and be patient. It's not a difficult process, and the controller itself is pretty durable, so I wouldn't worry too much about cracking it. Move along the corners of the controller handles and just keep swiping and pulling as you go to remove the black trim. Just keep using the prying tool nice and slowly and smoothly around the controller until the black trim starts slowly coming apart. You're going to notice here at this specific section there's a little clip. Just pop that forward open as well and just keep moving along the lines of the controller. Eventually the black trim is going to pop right off. You just pull here once everything is nice and removed. And you're going to pull down on it because it's stuck in between the two grooves on the touchscreen. So just pull down on it and it'll pop right off. The next step is to use the prying tool to remove the R1 and the L1 buttons from the PlayStation 5 controller. This is required because there are two screws behind them that's going to be needed for the next step. Once that's done, you're going to see the two screws on the left and the right side of the L1 and R1 buttons that you're going to need to remove. On the bottom of the controller, also on the left and right hand side, there are two screws that you're also going to need to remove. So let's start that now. Go ahead and take your time and remove the screws. Make sure you place them somewhere safe so that you don't lose these screws. They all look very similar. Now let's remove the one on the L1 and R1 buttons. It's the same process, just make sure you put them away somewhere safe so you don't lose these screws. They're very tiny. Now that that part is done, we can start removing the faceplate from the PlayStation 5 controller. Again, take your prying tool and try to place it in between the edges of the PlayStation 5 controller and just work your way up along the sides. Take your time and be gentle with this process. You're going to see here there's these two clips that you also have to make sure you remove. Don't break them, just make sure you pop them out a little bit, and it's going to help you remove the controller front plate. You're going to notice that at the first attempt, it's not going to come off easily. That's because you have to continue along the grooves of the side of the PlayStation 5 controller and work your way all the way up until they're completely removed. Once you get to a certain point where most of it is completely removed, it'll just pop right off, revealing the inside of the PlayStation 5 controller. With that finally removed, we can move on to the next step. We need to detach the guts of the PlayStation 5 controller from the front plate. You're going to need to remove these two screws right here. Once those screws are removed, set aside the screws again in a safe place for later. Once you remove the screws, we're going to have to go ahead and remove the battery. The battery has one connection right here, and it's connected to 3 wires. All you have to do is either use your tweezers to try to grab the white part of the wire, or use your fingers to grab the white piece of the connection and just pull. The next part is to remove this screw right here. And once that's removed, there's this small little cable here with a little rubber piece that also needs to be moved out of the way. This little cable, all you gotta do is just pull down, and to the right, there's 2 tiny little grooves, and it'll just pop right off. There's nothing really holding it, no screw or anything like that. Try to keep the rubber piece intact for later, but if it falls off, you can just clip it back on. With that removed, you can now remove this front plate here. Set that aside, and you're going to see another cable here that you need to pull out. You can use your tweezers again to pull it out, or you can grab the top little piece that's sticking out and just jiggle left and right, and it'll come right off. Now we're going to have to remove the left and right cables as well. Again, the same process you can use here. Grab tightly with your tweezers here or your fingers and just jiggle left and right as you pull out, and it'll just come right off. Do the same on the other side of the PlayStation 5 controller. Just jiggle left and right and it should come off nice and easy. Once you do that, there's another blue cable here that you have to do the same process. This one definitely required the tweezers because it didn't have enough space for my fingers to grab onto. So just grab it firmly with your tweezers and just pull it out nice and easy, and it'll come right off. Now with all the cables removed, you can kind of push on the buttons on the other side of the PlayStation 5 controller to kind of pop the guts out, and then you'll see that it'll just pop right off. With the motherboard kind of popped off, you can fold it down a little bit to gain access to other parts of the PlayStation 5 controller. Here is the chip you need to remove. There's nothing really holding it, it just kind of just pops right off, so you can go ahead and just set that aside. The next step is to remove these 2 screws here. This is going to help remove the sensitivity touchpad on the front of the controller. So let's go ahead and do that now, and make sure you set aside those screws in a separate place because those are actually different screws. They're silver screws and they're very specific to that part of the PlayStation 5 controller. Now fold the motherboard back on the PlayStation 5 controller, and then all together you can just kind of pop everything right off. Set that aside for later. Here's the front side so you can get a good glimpse of everything we've done so far. Now with the guts removed, we can go ahead and start removing the D-pad. The D-pad has a silicone backing on it. Just remove that nice and easy. And all the buttons as well will just come right off. There's nothing really holding it except that silicone piece. So just pop those guys off one at a time and set them aside. Once you're done with that, you can start going ahead and removing the PlayStation 5 silicone piece for the D-pad. Just remove that and the D-pad will come right off. Try not to get these 2 silicone pieces mixed up. Make sure you understand that they're very specific for each side of the PlayStation 5 controller. Now in the middle of the PlayStation 5 controller, there's this little silicone piece right here. You're gonna have to go and remove that. That is keeping in place the PlayStation 5 logo button in the front. So go ahead and remove that and set that aside. Once that's done, we have to go ahead now and remove the sensitivity pad. To remove the sensitivity pad, all you gotta do is press on the front of the sensitivity pad and kind of push inwards. It'll pop underneath the plastic piece on the top. You can set that aside for now. You could then move on to taking out this other silicone piece on the button side of the controller. Now be gentle with this one because this one's felt like it could potentially tear if just completely removed forcefully. So just take your time and just kind of remove it little by little on each angle. Next, you're going to have to remove these 2 plastic pieces here for the sensitivity touchpad you're going to need later on. You're also going to need to remove this particular little plastic silicone piece here that's protecting the little front wire. So just remove these plastic pieces and just set them aside, and then take away that middle piece from the center of the PlayStation 5 controller and you're good to go. The final step is to remove the plastic pieces that go below the joysticks. These you can just pop off with your nail. Just go ahead and apply a little pressure and get a little bit of a grip on it, and then just pop them forward. Do this on both sides and you're all set. Now that we finally cleaned out the PlayStation 5 controller, we can finally start rebuilding it with the new faceplates. So let's go ahead and start that now. The first thing you want to do is replace the silicone piece for the button side. It goes in one way and there's a specific arrow to tell you the direction it needs to go. Just make sure you take your time and put it in correctly. Just press down on it and it'll just fit right in like a glove. Next, go ahead and replace the silicone white piece that goes in the front of the controller. That is responsible for the white button in the front of the controller. The next step is to replace the little cable that goes in front of the PlayStation 5 controller. So as we replace this little cable here, you're going to see the cable itself has a little hole. That hole is going to fit into a little tiny clip groove that kind of holds it in place. But before you get there, you have to slide it into this particular slot and just kind of slide it in and under. So let's go ahead and do that now. Take the end of the clip and just slide it all the way in. And then the back side is going to go ahead and clip into that little plastic clip that I showed you before. You can see it there in black, right? And then the clip is on the back side of the controller. It's coming out through the back side. Once that's done, you can set the wire correctly. There's two little grooves on the top and left side, and that's going to go into the two little groove slots on the front of the PlayStation 5 controller. That's all that's holding it in place. Once that's done, you can put the other wire through the other side of the hole as well. Here is the close-up of where that other wire is going to go. The next step is to replace the buttons with the new silver gray buttons that I purchased, or whatever other button that you have. They kind of just go into place. Now these don't have, the triangle, the square, designs in front. So you kind of just, these are much easier to put in. You can just pop them in and not have to worry about which one goes where. But if yours has the design of which button is what in the front, you might have to just, use the template or go look at one of your other controllers and find out where each one particularly goes. Once that's done, replace the silicone piece that's going to hold the buttons in place. Just press them together. Again, the button side of the silicone is different from the D-pad, the silicone side, so make sure you're putting on the right one. Do the same for the D-pad. The D-pad is quite simple as well. Just pop it in, and then there's this own silicone piece. Put that behind it and you should be all set. The next step is to put back the PlayStation 5 controller logo. That goes right in the center right here. Just go ahead and flip it over and pop it in there, and then just put the silicone piece over it to secure it. Looking good. Here's a look at where we're at right now. Got the D-pad and the buttons all secured. The front PlayStation 5 button as well, and the white button that goes in the front as well is all done. So let's continue on. Now take the sensitivity touchpad and we're going to take it apart so that we can then replace the control module. There's going to be a left and right hand screw here that we need to remove. So let's go ahead and do that now. Once those screws are removed, you can go ahead and remove the front cover. Just be careful with the cable. Now here's the part that gets everybody really scared of doing. This control module is responsible for the sensitivity touchpad on the PlayStation 5 controller. The problem is that it's glued on. So the only way to remove the glue and loosen it up is to apply either a heat gun or a hair dryer on high heat. Hold it with your tweezers and just apply a bunch of heat to the whole control module, and little by little the glue will soften up, which will allow you to grab it with your tweezers and completely pull it off. This took me about maybe 7 to 10 minutes of nicely evenly heating it up little by little until it completely came loose enough for me to grab it and slowly remove it. Just be patient with this process and don't overstress the module. Once your tweezers are able to get in between, slowly but surely go ahead and grab it and move in and pull upwards. If you feel like there's too much physical force that's required, just go back and use the hair blower or the heat gun a little longer and soften up that glue. Once you finally removed it, you can now replace the control module on the new sensitivity touch plate. The sensitivity touch plate will clip into place of the new front pad. Once it's in place, we're not going to apply any type of glue. It's just going to sit in there nicely and snug. Now we're going to go ahead and reattach the front cover. The front cover will make this secure enough that no glue will be required. Just make sure you put the cable right between the little groove hole that's in the cover. And then we're going to go ahead and take the screws and screw the front plate to the sensitivity touchpad. With the sensitivity touchpad cover back in place, everything is secure and ready to go to the next step. Now going back to the front plate, we're going to go ahead and reattach the sensitivity touchpad. You're going to go from underneath the top plastic piece, go underneath and up, and then push kind of down on the sensitivity touchpad to fall in place. There's a groove on top that helps you align it. Let's set this aside for now, and let's go ahead and focus on replacing the R2 and L2 buttons. On the front of the PlayStation 5 controller mod, there are these two screws. Go ahead and remove those guys. Those two screws are responsible for loosening up the control module that has the L2 and R2 button. Where the arrows indicated, that will just pop right off when those two screws are loose. Once they're loose, what you're looking at here is the little control module. Now with the little control file, you're going to see there's a little cable here that we need to remove. That blue cable, I definitely needed to use the tweezers to pop that guy out. And there's also a screw right behind it that we're going to have to loosen up as well. Make sure you do not lose these screws. Put them in a safe place. Once that screw is removed, turn the module around and you're going to see there's 3 more screws on the other side. This is the cover. Let's start with the top 2 screws here. The third screw is in the lower right hand corner. Let's go ahead and remove him now. Once we remove that screw, the cover for the module is going to completely come off. Now when you remove the module, you're going to see another tiny little black clip here that's holding a metal rod. All you got to do is remove this little front cover gently and set that aside. Once you remove that, there's one more little piece. This is the cog wheel that's set in there. Let's remove the cog wheel and set that aside as well. Now, with the control module in front of you, the only thing that's really holding this L2 or R2 button here is just this metal rod. All we need to do is pull that little metal rod with your fingers and it'll pop right off. It might take a little force to do so, but eventually you'll get it out. Set that aside for now. Now the L2 button will just completely come right off and we can replace it with our new steel gray button. Now it's a little tricky to get it back in place, but there's 2 little grooves that you have to line up with the hole in order to get the other metal rod replaced. All you have to do is line up the hole so that you can replace the metal rod. Once you've lined it up, replace the metal rod. Once you've done that, you can now replace the cogwheel. Notice the cogwheel here. There's 3 little holes. Those 3 little holes need to be visible when you replace the other cover that goes on front of the cogwheel. That cover also goes over the metal rod. So make sure when you replace the cover, the metal rod is covered. Those 3 little holes need to be visible. If they're not visible, adjust the cogwheel first, then replace the cover and make sure the cover also goes over the metal rod. Once everything is secured, we can finally put the cover back on. The cover will complete the whole securement process. At this point, you can hold it with your fingers closed and then just go ahead and test the L2 button and make sure it's functioning correctly. Once you're confident, go ahead and replace all 3 screws. Once the cover is back in place, just go ahead and test the button one more time and make sure it's functioning as normal. Give it a couple of whacks. Now with that in place, we have to put back the screw that's on the opposite side of the control module that's behind the cable. So don't forget that screw, it's easy to miss. Let's go ahead and put that now. Once that screw is back in place, you can go ahead and reconnect the blue cable. Use your tweezers and grab firmly and try to reconnect that cable nice and snug. Make sure it sits correctly into the slot. Now to replace the L2 module, you're going to see that these 2 holes here. Here's the module itself. The module is going to go into that little hole on the bottom of the controller, and then you're going to line up the holes and screw them from the front side. So let's go ahead and do that now. Carefully insert the module correctly and then hold it and flip the controller over, and you can then see if the holes are lined up for the screws. So let's go ahead and screw these guys back in and make sure that it's screwed in and make sure that it's secure. Don't over tighten each screw. Screw in the top at 75%, then screw the bottom in at 75%, and then go back and screw all of them in 100%. Once that's done, go ahead and test it. Now we can move on to the R2 side. It's the same process. Let's go ahead and remove these 2 screws, which is going to loosen up the module. Once we have the module in place, let's go ahead and pull that cable out with the tweezers like we did in the previous steps. Once we've done that, let's not forget the screw that's hidden behind the cable. Let's go ahead and remove that guy as well. Once the cable is removed, flip it over and we're going to go ahead and remove the cover. Remember, there's 3 screws here. We're going to start with the top 2. And the 3rd screw is on the lower right hand corner depending on how you're holding the module. Once the cover is removed, sometimes it'll automatically also remove the rod. That's not a big deal. We needed to remove that anyways. The cogwheel also popped off in this instance, but again, we're going to need to take that cogwheel out and set it aside. Now with the new R2 button in hand, again, we're going to line it up with the hole. Notice that the button has this tiny groove and there's this tiny little hook. You want to make sure the tiny little hook goes inside the button and then come up over it and then line up the holes. Once the holes are lined up, go ahead and replace the metal rod. Test the button real quick and then let's move on to the next step. Let's go ahead and replace the cogwheel. Be mindful of the 3 little holes in the cogwheel. Now let's go ahead and put the cover back on. Make sure the cover goes over the rod. And once it's over the rod, also make sure that it goes over the cogwheel, revealing these 3 little holes. This is very important. Once everything is lined up, just go ahead and give the button a quick test. Now we can go ahead and replace the cover. Don't forget that this has 3 screws and it goes in one way. So let's go ahead and screw all 3 screws in and make sure the module is completely secured. Once that's secure, flip it over and don't forget the other screw here. Once the screw is in place, you can replace the cable. Again, use your tweezers and replace the cable nice and snug as shown here. Now to replace the R2 module, again, line up these holes here. What we're going to do is slowly flip the module over and slide it into that circular groove into the PlayStation 5 controller. It'll sit nice and snug and then flip it over while holding it in place. Doing this will ensure that it's lined up with the holes. Once it's lined up with the holes, all we gotta do is replace these 2 screws. Let's go ahead and screw those in now. Now you can see both modules have been replaced. You can go ahead and give it a quick test, and now we can go ahead and flip that over and place it aside. Now going back to the front plate, let's go ahead and replace the joystick insert. Those just kind of snap right in. Just follow the groove and it'll just snap right in without an issue. It's a very quick process. Now flip it over, and now we're finally going to go ahead and secure the sensitivity touchpad. Remember these plastic pieces that I mentioned earlier? They're going to go on the right and left hand side of the front plate. Let's go ahead and put those guys in now. And once that's in place, we're going to have to grab the entire module of the PlayStation 5 controller and lay it on top. Now grab the guts of the PlayStation 5 controller and we're going to have to lay it on top. Don't forget the cable from the sensitivity touch plate. It needs to go into this groove here. So just go ahead and slide that guy through there before you lay everything on top. It might take a little bit of time to do so, but just be patient. Once you've got that in place and the guts are laying perfectly aligned on top of the front plate, we can then go ahead and screw these 2 guys here. Again, don't forget that these screws were different than all the rest. These are silver screws. Let's go ahead and screw them in now. Once that's done, we can now replace the chipset. Take a look at how I have it orientated and then just go ahead and drop that guy in. Once that's done, we can go ahead and try to retrofit the motherboard back in place. There's a small little cable on the bottom. Just pop that out so that it doesn't get pinched. Once you move that out of the way, the motherboard will just kind of slide into place. Make sure all the cables are not pinched. You're going to have to reconnect those later. Take a look at where we're at right now. You see all the cables are not connected, and we're going to go ahead and do that next. First, we're going to start with the blue cable on top. You can kind of do this one with your fingers. Just align it with the insert and just kind of push it down with your finger. Make sure it's nicely snug, as you can see here. Now we're going to go ahead and reconnect the other cables on the right and left hand side. These should go in pretty easy with your fingers. Just go ahead and push those in with a little force. You might have to jiggle it left and right. Do this on both sides of the controller. Once that's done, there's a little cable on the bottom hand here. You can go ahead and reconnect that as well. Use the same process. Use your fingers and just kind of wiggle it back and forth. Make sure it's nice and snug. Once that's done, we can finally go ahead and start replacing the cover that goes on top of that motherboard. It kind of sits in place, and there's this screw right here that we need to screw back in to secure it. So let's go ahead and do that now. Once that's been secured, now you're going to have to screw this in right here. Do this on both sides of the controller. With both screws in place, the controller is pretty secure now. Now we have to put this tiny little cable back in place. This has another little rubber insert and 2 tiny little grooves. The rubber insert only goes in one way, so if it came out, you can kind of clasp it back over. On the PlayStation 5, there's these 2 little grooves right here. All you got to do is lay it on top and kind of fit them into the grooves for it to be secure. Once they're secured, you can go ahead and connect it to this little slot here. Make sure it's nice and snug. Now we can replace the battery. The battery again has only one little plug. It's going to sit right into this little groove right here. Again, it's a fairly simple process. Just pinch the connection cable with your fingers and just kind of push it in. Make sure it's nice and snug, that it's not going to fall out, and then the battery will just lay on top of the front cover plate. Now let's review these cables here. You have one small one on the bottom, and the opposite side of that connects to here and here in the front of the PlayStation 5 controller. Make sure all that is in place before you place the back cover. We can now replace the back cover. The back cover will just kind of lay on top, and then you just press down and eventually it'll just pop into place. There's these two clips here on the left and right hand side. Make sure that that's clipped in to ensure that the front and the back covers are nicely tight. You're going to see the tiny grooves on the right and left hand side of the controller as well. Make sure those are nicely secured and pressed down. Once that's done, let's go ahead and replace this screw here. There's one on the left and right hand side of the controller. Both of those are going to need to be replaced. You're going to find two screws on the bottom of the controller as well. Let's replace those. Once those are replaced, you can put your new fancy front cover on. There's these two grooves on the front of the controller on the left and right hand side. You kind of have to slide that into those grooves first before you can snap it down. So go ahead and slide it from the bottom up and be patient with this process. You can see that it's sliding into the groove, and then you just push up, and then once it's nicely snug, you can just press down and everything will line up and everything will just snap right into place. Once you push up and everything lined up, you can then start pressing down on the plate and everything will start snapping together. You can see here on the lower left hand side, it's still popped out. Just go ahead and press down on that, and it's just go ahead and it'll just go ahead and snap right into place. Again, do the center and go all the way around the controller, making sure that everything is snapped back into place and everything is nice and snug. With the plate back on, you can see the difference and how nice the controller looks. The contrast between the matte black and the wood trim looks spectacular. I'm really liking this combination. The final step is to replace the L1 and R1 buttons. They just kind of pop in place. You could just snap them right in. There's no screw required. Just pop them in the top and just press down. Do this for both sides. We finally finished replacing our PlayStation 5 controller. Yes, it was a long process because I was walking you through it, but once you've done it once or twice, for me, it takes me about half an hour to do the entire process. But I think it's definitely worth it. I mean, look at the way this controller looks compared to the stock. Overall, the Dark Knight controller has a nice contrast with the Dark Knight PlayStation 5 that I did in my previous video here on the top right hand corner. With a little time and effort, you can get your controller customized to your liking as well. I think the matte black and the wood trim with the steel gray buttons is an overall awesome combination. The feel of the controller now is a nice smooth texture similar to the stock PlayStation 5 controller, but now aesthetically it has my touch, my customization to my liking. It's definitely worth your time to definitely check it out. Go ahead and check out ExtremeRate's other parts on Amazon and customize your own PlayStation 5. I hope you guys enjoyed this long DIY video, and I highly suggest you guys go ahead and try customizing your own PlayStation 5. And as always, everyone, thanks for watching this video. Subscribe and like if you thought it was helpful. On to the next one.